Why did I write this book? This is an intriguing question for me because it came out of a very long journey. Part of my work is presenting the gospel. And as I was going through that process and really listening to what is the gospel, I began asking, what is the problem God is solving? And coming to some real tensions with the historical stories that I had sort of inherited or been given as I was growing up. And this created a tension in me that if I wanted to present the gospel, I wanted to feel good about what I was actually presenting. And what I found were really two predominant historical stories and a couple secondary ones, but the two dominant ones were a theory called ransom theory and penal substitutionary atonement theory. Atonement was the nature of reconciliation. It's sort of the linchpin of the gospel. It explains what problem is being solved and what is God's solution to that. And really the story presents two defining events, a garden and a cross. And what do those two events mean in relationship to each other? What is the problem God is solving? And as I began wrestling with these two stories, I really found a sense of tension with them, that they didn't quite reconcile in and of themselves, and they were diametrically opposed. One cast the problem out onto God. That was the theory that I had inherited, which was called penal substitutionary atonement theory. And one cast the problem onto Satan, and that was ransom theory. And as I began wrestling with these stories, I really said, I need a sense of understanding for the gospel that I feel comfortable with, that reconciles in a way that doesn't create paradox. Each of the two major theories really created sort of an inherent tension or paradox that things didn't quite reconcile. And these theories are important because they create the framing story for our understanding of the gospel. There's a problem that is created and a solution to it that happens at the cross. And so if we get the problem wrong, we're going to misunderstand the solution. And the assumption that I made is that if I set these aside, could this story inform me in a way that would actually produce an understanding that would reconcile? And that's all I did. I simply went back to the story and asked, what is this story actually presenting? And what I found was actually very liberating. And it was a way of seeing the story that redeemed the gospel for me. It brought it into clarity. It brought it into a sense of perspective that didn't make me wonder what God was doing and why. I never questioned the reality of what Jesus is doing. I remember one time when I was in 7th grade and I was really beginning to wrestle with the idea of the cross, and I remember crying. I remember having this very deep sense that something was happening that was profound there, that someone would actually give his life for me. And I knew it was love, so I never questioned the reality of the cross. I never questioned that Jesus was doing something for me. But as I really began exploring what history or what our forefathers said was happening and what Jesus was doing on the cross, it didn't resonate. One of the central arguments I'm making is where we locate the problem. When we get to the cross, our traditional assumptions of the problem actually begin to break down. If we assume God is paying Satan off to release humanity from captivity, it makes God subject to the demands of a created being. It makes God a trickster. And this was the inherent problem in it, is that it didn't quite reconcile with itself. If we assume God is paying off himself, in other words, he's satisfying the demands of his own justice, it creates this exceptionally distorted idea of a God who consistently demands mercy, but is unwilling to give it. And it creates this warped idea that God demands the death of his own son to appease his own sense of justice. And these are the two major assumptions that have informed our historical approach to Christianity. It's what is taught within seminaries and schools as the framework for the gospel. But if we frame the problem, locating it back where the story actually locates the problem, which is in the self, it actually begins to redeem the story. It begins to redeem our understanding of the cross. The cross becomes an act of love so ferocious that it literally destroys the power of death. And it gives us the evidence we need to transform where the problem actually resides, which is the judgment we make of the self. The cross becomes the moment God stretches out his arms and says, "This is how far I will go to show you I love you, that you are good, that my original judgment of you has always been true." There is something being ransomed, and it is us from ourselves. There is someone demanding a sense of substitution, and it is us. In other words, the way of seeing the problem redeems our old theories.